We always like to have an official opening to the Women's Association of Hilton Head Islands author series. I'm Robin Zimmerman, and I have been honored to serve as a moderator along with my co-host Janet Porter, who actually does the interviews with our esteemed authors. I appreciate your time today. We will be meeting John Warley in just a few moments. He is the author of the book, The Home Guard. It was published in 2019, and actually I interviewed him with WHHI back in 2019 at the Pat Conroy Literary Center about his book. And from what Jonathan Haupt has told me, who's executive director of the Literary Center, he's working on a new book. So I'm sure Janet will talk about that as well. So again, welcome everyone. This is our 24th webinar in our author series. It has been a very popular part of our programming for WAHI. I do want to remind you, this is a webinar, so you can see us as panelists. We cannot see you. If you have any questions, you have any comments, you have any recommendations for other authors or for books, as we mentioned before, there is that chat button at the bottom of your screen. Just chat away, and Janet will pick up those questions and ask John Warley. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in Janet Porter, who is our interviewer extraordinaire. Hey, Janet, you look colorful today.
Thank you. I'm in an outfit that has houses on it. It makes me look like a house, but it's very bright. So, you have those outfits that you like because they're bright, but they, certainly don't minimize your size. But
No,
I know, Robin, we mentioned before, and I thought we want to mention again about watch parties. That
Yes.
We have some people, we don't really know how many people are signing in now because some people are signing in on watch parties. And please consider, if you have a couple neighbors that you're friends with that are in WAHI, having them over and watching the author series together and make it a cocktail hour and have some little hors d'oeuvres. And we know other people are doing that, like in Port Royal, and having a great time.
Yeah, it sounds like fun. Well, I am going to sign off, and I'm going to turn things over to you, Janet, for our author for July 14th, and it's John Warley. So Janet, have fun with John. He's a great guy.
Thank you. Well, I am thrilled to introduce you to John Warley, who is author of the book we're discussing tonight called The Home Guard. John was introduced to us by Jonathan Haupt, and Jonathan Haupt is the executive director of the Pat Conroy Literary Center. John Warley is a native South Carolinian and attended the Citadel, where he happened to have the good fortune to have Pat Conroy as a classmate. And after John graduated from the University of Virginia Law School, he practiced law in Virginia. And in 1993, he moved to Mexico to write and teach. And I'm going to ask him a little bit about this, but he talks about how encouraging Pat Conroy was for him to follow his dreams and become a writer, which is what John is now. He's a full-time writer, and he divides his time between Beaufort and San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. And The Home Guard happens to be his 6th novel. So John, please join us. Hi, how are you?
I couldn't be better. Thank you very much.
So I am so honored to meet you. Now, where are you right now?
I am in sunny Beaufort, South Carolina.
Oh, are you? Is it sunny in Beaufort right now, or is it pouring down rain?
Well, it's out my window, it's sunny, but if I was looking behind me, it's pretty ugly. So
really,
yeah.
Really, because I was in Beaufort yesterday, and what came from Beaufort, was also here. So, it just because it's pouring down rain one place doesn't mean it's, in fact, here on Hilton Head, it can be pouring down rain on the north end of the island, and the south end of the island could be, bright and sunny. So, what we like to do, John, we'll have people chatting in, and I hope they'll chat in their questions, and I'll be able to see those and ask those of you. But I think it's always helpful if you start to tell us a little bit, give a quick synopsis of what The Home Guard about, the setting, the time frame, etc.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. And before I do that, thank you. Want to extend my thanks for having me today. These are always pleasurable experiences for me, but particularly with this group, it's a real pleasure to be speaking with you. I moved to Beaufort from Virginia in 2005, and I had, as I think the book jacket relates, I have an awful lot of family history in Beaufort. My great grandfather, 7 generations back, is the man credited with founding Beaufort in 1711, a man named Tuscarora Jack Barnwell. And so as I absorbed the Beaufort atmosphere, I also became much more engaged in my family's history here. And and part of that history is what is referred to locally as the Great Skedaddle, when the Union Navy showed up offshore in November of 1861, and all the residents of Beaufort fled inland when the forts on Fort Walker on Hilton Head Island and Fort Beauregard on Bay Point, when those forts fell, everyone in Beaufort left, and my family left with them. So I had a very personal connection to the Civil War, and I wanted to write about it. And I asked the classic author question, you know, what if? What if a 12-year-old boy had somehow been left behind to care for his aging grandmother in the middle of a war zone? And what would that do over time to his loyalties to the South and to the Confederacy when he encountered a 14-year-old Northern missionary girl who had come down to help teach the newly freed slaves? So this was, I was engaged by the possibilities and the loyalties. And so I wrote a book about it. And that's basically what the Home Guard is about.
So Carter Barnwell is the major character in the book.
Correct.
And is he based on anyone? I didn't realize the Barnwell connection. So is he based on like a real relative of yours?
Well, I have a son whose name is Carter Barnwell Warley. And so we've kept the family names, but Carter in the story is kind of an amalgam of a lot of boys that age, and my distant recollections of being 12 years old and being smitten suddenly by a pretty young girl. So there's a lot of that in there, but you know, I tried to stay true to the family history up to a point, but you know, there was, as far as I know, there was no Carter Barnwell who stayed in Beaufort during the Civil War. So it's the story is very much a novel.
So let's talk about that up to a point, because I've told everybody who I've talked to about this book, John, that I wanted a really good map of the local area, because it's all about the waterways and islands and between Beaufort and Bluffton and Hilton Head, and you know, and I always wanted to figure out exactly where they were on, you know, on their various travels, and where the Union ships were and where Carter was, and as I read the book. So let's talk about this up to a point part. So you must have done extensive history of the area, extensive research on the history of the area during the Civil War, because all of your discussions about what happened in Beaufort and Hilton Head are based on facts, right?
Correct. Yes.
And what was most surprising, because I learned a lot about the history of the island and the area during the Civil War from reading your book. And what was most surprising to you from that research?
Well, one of the things that surprised me the most, it is a pretty mundane topic generally, but the tax sales that the Union conducted during the war changed the face and composition of Beaufort forever. And those 1863 and 1864 tax sales completely reconfigured the Low Country. You know, before the Civil War, there were a few major cotton plantations owned by cotton moguls. And after the Civil War, there were still cotton farms here and cotton plantations, but now the ownership first of all, they'd gotten radically smaller. And secondly, the ownership was quite different. You had some owners who were what we in the South affectionately refer to as carpetbaggers, who came down with some money and invested in property that was cheap by any standard. But you also had a lot of African Americans who bought the land that they had been working for generations. And some of them, if you drive out to St. Helena today, some of those farms are still there, owned by the same families that have been farming them for generations. So that was one big surprise to me. But you're right, I had to do a lot of, the history for this research was intensive because I was determined to get the history right. As you may know from living around this area, there are about 5 million Civil War experts throughout South Carolina and Georgia, and they're waiting to catch you on some error of history research. So I was determined to try to get the history right. Obviously, the novel part of it, I took some liberties with some things that happened, but I hope I got the history right. And I'm glad you mentioned wanting to know where things are, because one of the things I think the publisher did a nice job of is in the interior cover of the book, there is a map which shows the location of the key points in the book. And I'll tell you a quick story about a book club in Charleston read the book and said some nice things about it. And the organizer of the book club wanted to organize a tour of all of these places where the book that are important to the book. So they rented a boat down here, the Prince of Tides pontoon boat. And the book club came down from Charleston one day, and we all went out sailing down the Beaufort River. And I was narrating and pointing out to them the landmarks of which are critical to the book. And as I suspected you might remember from the book, there's something I call Signal Oak, which is the oak tree that was over on the Whale Branch where Carter would leave messages for his cousin Gabe and the Confederate forces that were on the mainland. And everybody in the boat on the Prince of Tides wanted to see Signal Oak. So I said, having invented Signal Oak, I had to come up with something. So I said, sadly, in the hurricane of 1893, Signal Oak blew down, and it's just a tragedy that oak tree was lost. But this is the Low Country, and these things happen. So everyone was quite disappointed. But I really enjoyed taking them over to Cane Island and showing them where the lodge would have been and where Three Pines Plantation would have been. We were seeing it from the water, so it was only so much you could see. But I really think people got a lot out of that tour. If I
would love to do that tour. Actually, John, that you would make a great tour guide, because I think tour guides are taught to tell the tourists what they want to hear, not necessarily the facts at all times. And I've certainly had we had tour guides we were with a tour guide one time in a Hispanic country, and somebody said to the tour guide, "Who did the graffiti?" Well, of course, the tour guide had no idea who did the graffiti. And he launched into, "Oh, well, that's our famous, Pablo de Picasso de Allende, who, is well known throughout Guatemala." Did a whole speech for these two women and who listened attentively. And they got on the bus and he turned to me and said, "How do I know who did the graffiti?"
There you go.
So that's what that reminds me of. So how long did it take you to write The Home Guard?
Oh, I worked on between the research and the writing, I would say it was about a 4-year project. Now it wasn't all concentrated for 4 years, because I was also working on a history of the Citadel at the same time. And those two research projects kind of paralleled each other. I would work on one for a while, and then I would go to the other. But I had a little bit of a deadline on the Citadel book, which I did not have on the Home Guard. The Citadel book needed to be finished by the time my class's 50th year reunion came in Charleston and in 2017. So I had a kind of a time crunch on that one. So anyway, but I would say that generally about 4 years, start to finish.
And where did you do most of your research? I mean, I happen to be, John, on the Beaufort County Library Board director. So did you were you at the library a lot? Were you, I mean, tell me about, did the Pat Conroy Center help? I mean, where did you do your research?
Pat's, the Literary Center wasn't so much helpful in the research. They're always an inspiration for the writing, but not for the research. There are a lot of online resources, and I have to give a shout out to, the history of Beaufort County. We are blessed to have probably the most extensive history written of any county in America. I don't know who has a better one. As Larry Rowland is fond of saying, all history, all United States history begins in Beaufort County. And the 3-volume set of the history of Beaufort County is about as thorough as anything you could want. But then there are, in addition to Larry's and Steve Wise's excellent histories, there are a lot of books that are specific to the Civil War, and I relied on those heavily: memoirs, letters, things like that. I'd certainly use the Beaufort Library, Grace Cordial's Beaufort Digital District Collection was very helpful. And then I also have some family material that's helpful. I mentioned that my family on both sides comes from South Carolina. My mother's family, the Barnwells, were particularly prolific in the letter writing department. Let's just put it that way, which is another way of saying I have boxes and boxes of this correspondence. One of my aunts wrote a 3-volume memoir called 3 Houses. And I love this memoir. She was in the first graduating class at Converse College. She was born in the 1870s. And when she retired from being an educator in the 1950s, she wrote this 3-volume memoir of her life. And in it, she talks about some of the ways they did things back then. And one of my favorite scenes in the Home Guard is when Miss Ma first gets to the hunting lodge, and she tells Carter that the floors are filthy because of hunters and overuse over the years. And the first thing they needed to do was clean the floors. And he needed to go to the beach and find her some sand. And so there's a description in there that's about a page long of how he goes and gets the sand, and then she has some lye soap, and they use the sand and get in burlap bags, and basically Carter's exhausted at the end of the process. But I got that whole account from my aunt's description in 3 Houses of how they cleaned floors back in that day. So those are the kinds of things that you really mean a lot to you as a writer. And the other irony of that is that in the first volume, she put in a preface, and she said she never had children. So she said, my hope is that one day I'm writing this to give you, my nieces and nephews, some idea of the good life that I have enjoyed, and in hopes that one day something within these pages will inspire a novel or contribute to a novel. And so I thought that was particularly poignant, that I got to use her floor cleaning, and I borrowed some other things from it too, but that's one I vividly remember. So you never know where material is going to come from. You just have to be open to finding it.
Now, Thomas Barnwell, Thomas Barnwell?
I do know Thomas, yes.
And, we had him and Carolyn Grant and were featured at our April luncheon because we talked about, they discussed, Carolyn did a presentation on Gullah Days, which also was a rich history for me of the Civil War and of, the island and all the history of the island. I think if you're gonna really, it's a shame how many people who live here just think of it in contemporary times and don't really appreciate our rich history. I grew to appreciate that from reading Gullah Days.
We have a ton of rich history, and the Gullah history is among the richest. That we
Now, have you and Thomas Barnwell figured out if you're connected?
we I was hesitant to go down that trail because I was thinking that, my people, my ancestors were slave owners, and they were on the wrong side of history. And Thomas and I did not explore that extensively. I actually went over to Hilton Head to interview him about a doctor named Gatch. Have you ever heard that name before? Dr. Gatch?
Was he the first doctor on the island?
He had a practice in Bluffton.
Oh.
And he was the only doctor around who would service Black patients. And his waiting room was integrated, and it was quite radical in the 50s. And Tom Barnwell knew him. And I was trying to collect some stories with the idea that I would either write a short story or a book about it. I've put that project aside, but I still one day may get back to it. Gatch was quite a character.
Actually, we need to follow up on that because I have some information about him that you might be interested in. We can talk about that later.
Oh, good. I'd love that.
His name just came up in the context of the Hilton Head Library System. So we'll have to follow up on that. So as you were doing research for the book, did you do research and then decide to feature an adolescent boy by the name of Carter Barnwell as your major character, or did you have Carter in mind first?
I had Carter in mind first.
Did you?
The story in my mind always centered around this 12-year-old boy caring for his grandmother in a war zone, having divided loyalties, not initially, of course, because if you're 12 and you've lived in Beaufort all your life and all of your people have been talking about Northern aggression and the war breaks out, you're going to start out with your sympathies with the South. I mean, that's just human nature. But then when Sanja arrives and he starts seeing some other sides of the whole thing and maturing, he gets, of course, a different perspective. And I also had, this story might interest you, I also had a mental image of Sanja, the girl, the 14-year-old girl that I wanted to write about. I knew that she was blonde. I knew she was Scandinavian in origin, but I did not have I wasn't modeling her after anyone I knew. Other than those general characteristics, she was a little bit amorphous to me. And I was out on the West Coast visiting a classmate, and we went up to the Big Sur, and I'd never been to the Big Sur. And we stopped at a series of art galleries in the Big Sur, and I walked into one, and this very pretty blonde girl came from behind a counter and said to me, "Can I help you?" And I said, "You already have." And she said, "Do I know you? How is that possible?" And I said, "Well, I'm writing a book, and it has as its heroine a very pretty young blonde girl, and I did not know until a minute ago what she looked like, and now I know exactly what she looked like." And so I said, I got her name. She gave me a business card, and I emailed her the next day, and I said, "I really apologize yesterday I mean, I hope you don't think I'm just some geezer off his meds or something, but it really was inspiring to me as a writer to see, and I'll send you a copy of the book when I finish it. So I did, and we exchanged some emails, but it was kind of one of those aha moments that you get, which makes writing fun.
So you sent her a copy of the book?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Oh my gosh, oh, that's great. So I want to talk about the Home Guard
Yes.
and the title of the book and what the Home Guard is. So explain that to people.
Well, the Home Guard is a term they used back in the war for the people who were unable to go to fight. You know, part of the ethos of the Civil War in the South was that everyone was involved to make some contribution, as misguided as that might have been historically. And so everyone wanted to feel like they were doing their part. And, you know, the women made uniforms and nursed wounded soldiers, and there were men, of course, were doing the majority of the fighting. The people who were left at home, who were either too young to be eligible for the army or too old or infirmed, were generally referred to as the Home Guard. And those were the people who theoretically, if everything else fell apart, they would be the ones left to defend the town or the property or the last thing to be defended. And so I kind of thought of Carter in that way. He's too young to be to enter the army. He eventually becomes eligible for the draft, but by the time he does, he doesn't want to go. He doesn't want to fight. He's lost confidence in the South's cause. And so the last thing he wants to do is to go off, put a rifle on his shoulder and go off to some battle that has sort of preordained outcome, because by then the pattern of the war was pretty clear. So that's what the Home Guard is, and that's where it derives its name.
So I never thought before reading your book about the fact that there were people like resistance people, like in, World War II with the occupancy of the Nazis, that there were, Southern Confederate resistance people who were in territories occupied by the Union. So that was like we think about that. We read a lot. It seems it's very popular right now to read a lot of books about World War II and in France and in particular, and Belgium and Holland and, the people who were in the resistance. And I thought, wow, why don't we know more about the people in the Civil War, the way the Southerners were resisting. And I don't remember learning about that in school. Is that a part of history that is kind of unreported in Civil War books?
Did you ever read you mentioned World War II. Did you ever read A Woman of No Importance about
Yes,
that?
I think that's a fabulous book.
Fabulous book. I love that.
Wasn't
book.
that a great book? Yeah, we should write that down, Nancy. A Woman of No Importance.
Terrific book. Anyway, to answer your question, particularly on the mainland and in the upstate, there were unionists. There were people who were not happy with the separation and were union sympathizers. But you'd have to say, in all honesty, that they were fairly rare in South Carolina. I mean, I think about the convention in Charleston, where the South seceded there at Institute Hall. They had something like 100, and don't quote me on this, but 125 or 150 signatories on that secession bill. And the only person of any substance in Charleston who opposed seceding was James Pettigrew, the famous lawyer, who is famous for his quote that South Carolina is too small to be a country and too large to be an insane asylum, which is, if anything, is true, that might be one thing that is proven true. But so there were some sympathizers, but in Beaufort, the problem was there weren't any, there wasn't a reliable source of information for the Confederacy because all the white people had left. Now, there were probably some freedmen on the plantations who still had some Southern sympathies for their former owners. You know, a lot of the slave owners, when the big skedaddle, the great skedaddle came, tried to convince their newly freed slaves to go with them to Charleston or Columbia or Augusta, wherever they were fleeing to. They wanted to take their support staff with them. Most of the slaves, almost all of them, realized that the appearance of the Union Army meant freedom for them, and they were not going to go there. But the South did have some sources of information among freedmen who stayed, but they couldn't ever trust it. So that's what made Carter's role in early part of the book as a spy for the Confederacy. That's what made it so critical. And you know, Gabriel Hayward is his cousin Gabe is you know, is a fictional character that I invented to be the guy who recruits him as the eyes and ears of the South. And I think from comments I've gotten from readers that worked pretty well.
Oh, I think it worked really well. He's kind of a roustabout. That's, I don't know if that's a word that comes to mind, but that's what comes to mind from reading about Gabe. He was just a roustabout, you know. It's thought of himself as a real ladies' man for sure.
Gabe knew the ladies. He did, and he loved the ladies.
So I'm curious as to whether you know about the history of your own family during the Civil War, and you had family in Beaufort during the time of the Civil War, right?
Well, I had family, the family in Beaufort, starting with Tuscarora Jack Barnwell, who was, I won't give you the whole genealogy, but the thumbnail of it, Tuscarora Jack Barnwell, who is credited, as I said, with founding Beaufort in 1711, arrived from Ireland in 1701. He died in 1724, and his son Nathaniel Barnwell then made the family fortune in cotton and other staples. All of that line is, they're all buried in St. Helena's churchyard, right, you know, within a mile and a half, 2 miles of where I'm sitting. So the Beaufort history right up until the Civil War was, with the Barnwells, was extensive and unbroken. Like everybody else, they left. My family left, and you know, the family homestead was where the Santa Elena Museum was, right there on Bay Street, the old federal courthouse. That was where Barnwell Castle was. So my family departed that, but when they came back after the war, that house was being used as a hospital first, and then a courthouse for the Union after the war. So they had no place to come back to, so they bought a house on Federal Street, which is in the Point. And my grandfather grew up there. My grandfather was born before the Civil War, 1860. And I have that link because I remember him very well. He lived to be 92. And as a 5 or 6 year old boy, I remember sitting on his lap. I can remember the scratch of his beard when he hugged me. And it has always been remarkable to me that I have that contact with somebody born before the Civil War. But anyway, he left, grew up here in Beaufort, went off to Swanee, became an Episcopal minister, and the last of the family died out in the mid 1920s. So as far as I know, until I came back, that line had not been in Beaufort. So it was a gap of some almost 100 years.
So you don't have a bunch of cousins and, in that you meet up with regularly in Beaufort?
I have a bunch. Yeah, the Barnwell tree grows out with a lot of branches and a lot of roots, and a lot of the cousins, second and third cousins, and all that are still around. I mean, I see
Are
them
they?
all the time. Yeah.
Oh, they are. Okay.
Yeah.
Because when you said the family died out, I
I
thought
just meant my particular line of
your particular branch.
yes, my particular branch. Yes.
So we always like to ask people, I'm assuming you're working on a new novel.
I'm so glad you asked me. I just finished a book I swore I would never write. You mentioned the fact that I'm a graduate of the University of Virginia Law School. I practiced law for 40 some years in addition to trying to do some writing. And I swore that I would never take up legal thrillers. But I succumbed to the temptation. I wrote a legal thriller over the last year, and I sold it a few weeks ago to a publisher who is bringing it out in April of next year. So I'm very excited about that. It's called A Jury of One, and I will have an announcement on that in the coming weeks. I'll be looking, let me give a shameless plug here. I'll be looking for book club opportunities to talk about it. So keep me in your Rolodex if you don't mind.
Well, Bobby Helbig does all of our scheduling, and I'm telling you, she's writing that down quickly, John. So that's terrific.
Bobby, give me some love here. Get me back in front of the group sometime down the road.
I already wrote it down. I'm way ahead of you both.
I love it. I love it.
Right. Well, we have a history of a lot of lawyers who become writers, like people like John Grisham and other people who, do that. So why were you so resistant to doing a legal thriller
that's a really good question. I had this weird notion for a long time that killing somebody, even on a page, was sort of a cheap way to gin up interest in a reader. I was in a book club in Mexico one time with a guy who wrote true crime stories. And I said, I'd like to read one of your books. So he gave me one. And I said, his name was Roy. I said, Roy, I noticed you killed a couple of people in the first chapter. He said, John, I couldn't write a book if I couldn't kill a bunch of people. I mean, I don't have anything interesting to say unless I kill some people. I said, well, I'd like to think I have something else to say other than killing people. So I think I resisted it for years and years. And then I had this idea for this legal thriller, the one I just finished. And I had somebody got shot in the first chapter. I said, that's kind of fun. I mean, I don't, I hope that doesn't indicate I'm a bad person, but it was kind of fun to knock somebody off in the first chapter. So I did. And I like the book. I think it's pretty good. And I hope readers like it, so we'll see. I'm no threat to Grisham. I think he can sleep easy in Charlottesville. I think his career is safe from me, but I have had fun doing it.
Well, there's other people like Scott Turow and other people who I have loved reading, who have turned into great writers.
There's some terrific ones out there. I hesitate to get into the genre because number one, I'm getting in kind of late. And number two, it's my first effort in the genre. So you usually learn, things as you go along. But I think I got some good advice in writing this, some good editing advice. So I think it works. I hope it does.
Well, congratulations on selling your book.
Thank you very much.
And we'd love to have you back. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
I've had a great time. Thank you for having me.
Hey, John, that was wonderful. I definitely want you back in April when your book comes out. for sure.
I'll put you down. You can have some first choice of dates. But
It
Ah,
sounds,
not
sounds like-
exactly booked up at this point for April.
it sounds like we're not going to have to twist your arm to do a book signing for us.
You will
no.
not. You will not. But if I could make one more plug to your readers, Amazon is the thing we all writers sort of love to hate because they've got good things and bad things. If any of your participants like the Home Guard well enough to rate it highly, always appreciate an Amazon review. It doesn't cost anything. You don't have to write a review. You can just star it, and that's always appreciated. So
Yeah, I already did that.
you're the best. You're
5
the
stars,
best.
5 stars. Great job. Thank you, John. Thank you,
Thank
Robin. And
you.
I know you're now going to give us an update on everything you're working on so hard
Yeah.
as our program chair.
Thank you, John. Nice to see you again. And Janet also.
Thank
Great
you, ladies.
job.
I'm taking off, signing
Okay.
off.
Bye, John. Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye.
What I love about this particular interview is that Janet, it really wasn't an interview, it was a conversation. And Janet just, does such a beautiful job, and we appreciate her so much. We also appreciate Nancy Fish, who this coming year is kind of tied at the hip with me. She is a vice president for events, and I'm the program chair. And then there's Bobby Helbig. Of course, Bobby is co-chair of the author series. And so we've got a lot of exciting things planned in the author series this coming year. But I want to thank the whole team as we begin our 2022-23 season. Also want to thank Claudia Aller, who is our new president or incoming, well, she is our president now as of June the 1st. We've got a great board and a super council, and we've got a lot of exciting things on the program page, beginning with August, the author series, the chef series with Cheryl Jacobs. She has just hit the ground running. So she has a couple events planned in August and then in September. So she is just rocking it. And then I just wanted to share with you, we have traditionally the 4 luncheons. This year we're calling them signature events because the first one actually isn't a luncheon, but it is an opportunity for us to welcome each other back and kick off our year. And we're actually going to be at Celebration Park on September the 22nd in the afternoon, 3:30 to 6:30. We're calling it the Fall Kickoff and Expo. So it's an opportunity for us to see each other again and have some fun. And all of our interest groups will be represented. So you can find out what interest group you'd like to sign up for. And also our other committees, our author series, our chef series. If you want to be involved in one of the committees, this is your opportunity to get involved. And we're always looking for more volunteers. We have these guys who'll be playing in the background. The charge will be very low. There will be opportunities for snacks. And if you'd like a glass of wine or a drink, you can certainly buy that. So we're really looking forward to celebrating our joy. And that's really our theme for this year. It's finding joy. Last year, we had a great theme of resilience as we got through the COVID period. And so this year we're finding joy in so many things, in service and giving and learning, in the holidays. And in September, we're finding joy in each other and in Wahi. We want to really thank Nancy. She's executive director of the Sandbox. And so difference makers each month, besides what they do, making difference in a day, each month there'll be a particular nonprofit that we'll focus on. And so the Sandbox will be for September, and the Sandbox is right near Celebration Park. And so we'll be able to go over there for tours. So you can come in, you can stay an hour, bring your chair. We'll have some tables, we'll have some tents, and I'll talk more about it in the pink paper as we move forward. So with that, again, I just want to thank the leadership. I want to also kind of give you a little tease. We're going to have a tribute to veterans coming up in November. Mila Lerner, who's a Broadway producer, is going to have a Broadway series for us. We have 3 sessions of that. The first one will be in October. We're back in December at the Beach and Tennis Club with Finding Joy in the Holidays, and then some big surprises for the spring. So with that, we want to again thank Janet for this wonderful conversation with John Warley. The book is called The Home Guard. And he said, go on Amazon and give a review, and certainly go on Amazon or at your independent bookstore or Barnes and Noble and buy the book. That's the way to really celebrate and congratulate the writer of that particular book. So we appreciate John and his time and the whole team. And thank you for watching. And we'll see you, we hope, in September. We don't have a date knocked in yet or locked in yet, but for sure we'll be back in November. But we hope to be back with you in September. Until then, bye everybody, and thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time. Bye-bye.